Globespan is a Guyanese dialogue moving towards the realization of one nation in one Guyana. It's a platform that offers an all-inclusive discussion with the pros, the cons, the ones that have taken a side, and the ones that stand in the middle. Globespan believes agreeing and disagreeing are part of the nation building. Globespan believes that every Guyanese voice is part of the nation building. As we span the globe for voices from the diaspora and those living home, we stand on our commitment that we are all Guyanese working towards one nation in one Guyana. This land is our land now. As the world turns on its axis, bringing changes, we as Guyanese must adapt to those changes for a better Guyana for all. Globespan stands on its axis with its belief that one nation, one Guyana, one destiny must include voices from all corners of Guyana.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. To all of our viewers at Globespan 24/7, welcome again to another program, globespan247.com. Sorry, Globespan 24/7. We're discussing tonight election 2025, and also we're going to be expanding more in terms of the polls that's looking towards a minority government. While I'm making these announcements, I encourage you to share and like the program. Share the program on Facebook and also on YouTube. Go ahead and press the subscribe button. Globespan 24/7 in its 6 years, offering a community service to all voices. The platform invites all political parties, civil and religious leaders to share their opinions and address concerns. You could contact Globespan 24/7 by calling 631-782-8694 or email support@globespan247.com. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, brothers and sisters, welcome. We appreciate you joining us again tonight. And our guest is no other than Mr. Vincent Alexander. We're very grateful to Mr. Alexander for making the time on such a busy week. It's probably the most busiest time for him now within the 5 years period, but he still partitioned some time to spend with us and to answer some of the questions that we may pose to him tonight. And of course, we have no other than Mr. Timothy Jonas, Senior Counsel. Mr. Jonas has now become more of a cornerstone at Globespan in his major contribution throughout the years. I believe now in the 6 years, he's pretty much has been on very frequently. One additional guest that should be joining us very soon is no other than Professor Paul Tennessee, the former leader of DLM, a man well experienced in the political realm, and he's currently now the executive director at Roraima Institute. So welcome our panel, and certainly we want to be able to get the discussion started. We want to focus for the first few minutes on GCOM in itself. And again, I want to open for any valid questions from our audience to Mr. Alexander with respect to the election process that's going to be taking place on September 1st. We're already in that mode right now. So while we're waiting for some questions to come in, I just have a few for Mr. Alexander. And Mr. Alexander, offline, I brought a few of these questions up, but for the benefit of our audience, I just want to ask you these questions again. And I'll probably ask you 3 questions in a row so we could move it along. One of the questions was, all the boxes inspected at the beginning of the voting day by all the political parties. That's one, meaning that there's no contents in the box from the opening first vote. And then second is that, are the boxes in the eyesight when a voter is placing their slip to avoid anyone putting more than one vote into a box? And these are some of the questions that people are asking us as well, some of the concerns they have. So I'm just passing them along to you. At the ending of the voting day, are the box sealed after counting the votes? Are the box sealed in setting up for their transportation to the GCOM headquarters. That's just three to start with, Mr. Alexander, if you want to comment on them.
Yes, good evening to your viewers. There's three questions, all of which fall within the standard operation procedures. The way polls start prior to 6, the GCOM officials, the presiding officer, the assistant presiding officer, the ballot attendant, and the poll clerk, and the police in addition, should all be in place prior to 6. And prior to 6, the ballot box is open, and all present are allowed to inspect to ensure that the ballot box is in fact empty, devoid of anything whatsoever. And then it is closed and placed in sight of all persons present for the commencement of polling. The second question, well, I answered the second question with the first. It's placed in the sight of all. Where the ballot box is positioned, everyone who's in the polling station, legitimately so, can see it. And I should emphasize that in the process of inspecting the box, the polling agents are also a part of that process. At the end of poll, when the things which are to be placed in the box are placed in the box, and those are essentially the ballots, the ballot box is sealed, and the political parties also reserve the right to place seals on the box at that time.
Okay, thank you for that, Mr. Alexander. Tim, do you have any question for Mr. Alexander or any comment on that?
Well, first of all, Vincent, I appreciate that you came out to answer questions. To me, it's so important to do a couple days before the elections when, as we know, us Guyanese are a suspicious lot. So I think that what you did was important to lend comfort, give information, and even the most obnoxious critic must respect that it was done. Part of Nohar's question, one of the aspects of Nohar's question that I heard was, how do you ensure that a person doesn't put more than one ballot in the box? Now, my understanding of it is that, first of all, the ballots are secure documents and you receive one when you go to vote and present your ID. And then second of all, upon completion, when the list of electors at that place of poll, everybody who turns up to vote, your name is checked and crossed out against the list that the person in charge has, so that a reconciliation can be done, the number of ballots in the box versus the number of names checked off versus the number of unused ballots. Is that a correct inference?
Yeah, you're quite correct. I have heard people say that sometimes the presiding officer, not the APO, can slip 2 ballots to a person. That's not impossible. But what you explained in terms of the end of poll, there's a reconciliation process where the ballots in the box are counted. They should correspond with the counterfoils in the book that are there, as opposed to complete ballots, as well as they should correspond with the names which have been ticked off on the voters list, the official voters list. So there's a mechanism to ensure that the ballots represent the number of persons who were allowed, who voted. And that count also would include if we have spoiled or destroyed ballots. Everything has to balance back. And that's done in the sight of all persons present.
So working from memory, being no expert in this thing from when I voted last time, as I remember, you go in as a voter and you present your ID and your name is called, so that the people who are present, the representatives, let's just use 2 parties, PNC, PPP. The representatives there each have an identical list and each of them can tick off your name. So they know that Jonas has turned up, Jonas' name is on the list and he is turned up and has been given a ballot to vote. And then at the end of the day, they can compare the number of ticked off names against the number of ballots in the box that they're counting. And therefore they know that nobody slipped 2 ballots in, because if it's 70 names ticked off and 70 ballots in the box, all is well. Is that what we're saying?
That's correct. In fact, one of the advisories is that if they have a slack period, even at that time, they could seek to have the APU's count of the ballots, the ballots that were handed out, correspond with the names struck off by the agents. So in slack time, they can even do that to make sure things are going well.
Right. Now, in the event, I didn't see any discrepancies last time, but in the event there's a discrepancy. So let's say 70 names ticked off, but there are actually 72 ballots in the ballot box. I have never seen that. I hadn't seen that before. But let's say, suppose that happens. Is there a procedure to address that eventuality?
No, there is. Well, we'll try to balance the way that has been mentioned. I don't know of a procedure to do that. What is critical, even in that instance, is the overall balancing.
Yeah.
Because if you have a larger number in the box and the name struck off, you have to be able to reconcile it with the counterfoils, the spoiled ballots and the destroyed ballots, so that really it's difficult to get
it's hard to do,
in my view, where you have more ballots than names struck off, unless there's a human error where a name was not struck off.
Right.
In that instance, you will be able to balance it with the counterfoils in the book, so that you know the ballot was in fact handed out by GCO.
Yes, I agree. And given that you have a specific number of blank ballots in the morning in the first place, it's hard to have a different number at the end. It's difficult to do. I'm seeing that. So this leads to me, to the last question I have in this context, which I think is, given what you hear people talking about, it seems to me, and I'm asking if you would agree with this, that in that case, even if there are 10 dead people's names on that list, that should not affect the validity of the elections, because every person who turns up and presents an ID, the name is ticked off, and therefore this talk about a bloated list should not have anything to do with the correctness of the outcome at the end of the day.
I do not indulge in the use of the term bloated list, because for all intents and purposes, the names on the list are people who were legitimately registered. The problem I have with this is that we have no mechanism for the removal of the overseas dead persons from the list. And they may well be in the hundreds of thousands, may well be in the hundreds of thousands. And in fact, I would always contend that when people make this reference of bloated lists, they may not be conscious of the fact that what they are referencing is a list that has a large number of overseas guys. And that is why you cannot correlate the voters list with the population census. Because the population census does not include the overseas Guyanese. But the overseas Guyanese as of 2008 can be on that list.
Yes, and
So
I
I
don't
don't
want
have a
to...
problem with this, with the content of the list from that perspective. But I have the problem with the content of the list from the perspective is once you have names on that list of people who are not present, in our system, I would contend, and I think that this contention in relation to the past it's evidenced that there are some weaknesses in the system. The first weakness is the ID cards. The ID cards, for me, and everyone who I've shown this to could not disagree, are not necessarily good for facial identification, partly because they're dated. So you have ID cards of people who registered in 2008 at age 14, who are now probably 30-something years old with a significant change in features, and you want to use that ID card to identify the person. So in that circumstance, someone could indeed attempt to use the ID card of someone else, because our facial recognition system is weak. And that is the reason why I argued so much for biometrics, because digital identification is far better than facial identification. But then people will raise questions about the system in relation to facial identification. So I've spoken to ID card itself being used, and the fact that you may have very contentious situations where people say, well, that's not the person in question. That's not the person in question. What I have noticed historically is that really, even the polling agents of the parties have not necessarily paid significant attention to the ID cards. This is my observation, an observation I even saw on Ballot Day. What they tend to do is to ensure that the card called out to them corresponds with the information that they have on the list, which they have, and they don't really pay that much attention. And I'm saying that to say this, that we have said to the officials that if a polling agent contests somebody's facial identification, then we should do something which previously we did not do. We should then treat that person in the manner in which someone who comes without an ID card is treated. That is, to go to the folio and to ask that person questions pertinent to himself or herself, randomly to ask questions, so as to verify that because of the person's knowledge, that more than likely that is in fact the right person. So there's a backup now we have put in place for purposes of identification. A lot of this now relies on the GCOM officials and how well they do their job. Because, I have contended in the past that one of the problems we have had is, I call it human error, but it could be more than human error that can interfere with the system. I think not at the place of poll, but we have now the contention that in fact human intervention, be it Boodoo's intervention or Mingo's intervention, has sought to undo the system, so that there is that problem that may occur if there is human malfeasance, so to speak, where somebody in the polling station, PO is asking questions, who knows. But basically, as much as we can do at this time, I think it's being done. Suffice to say that my own disposition is that once you did not resort to digital identification, then you have indeed left some gaps in the system. And given the nature of politics in Guyana and the population of our polling stations, the way they're populated, it is not impossible for some people to be able to penetrate the system.
Yeah.
And
Are you
penetrating the
aware?
system
Are you aware of any instance in the last elections where a person has presented an ID card and an official at the place of poll has said you are not the person as identified in that ID card?
I didn't have that occurrence knowingly on the last occasion.
So you're not aware of any
But
instance where that happened in 2020?
No, but I did have that occurrence in the previous election at the Echo School.
How many?
In fact, huh?
How many?
I witnessed one occurrence, and we had to remove the person immediately.
One in 2015.
I'm not sure if it's 2015 or 2011, but the previous election.
So in the last three elections, you're aware of one incident where someone turned up with an ID card and an official said that you are not the person in the ID card. In the last three elections, you're aware of one such incident.
No, I'm not aware of that. I'm aware of, not in 2020, but the previous election.
Yes, in the last three elections, you're aware of one such incident taking place.
Where the official allowed the person through. And it was the official allowed the person through, but the vigilance allowed for people to question what the official had done.
No, what I'm asking you, Vincent, forgive me, I'm sorry if I'm not being clear, but what I'm asking you is, in the last three elections, 11, 15, 2020, are you saying you are aware of only one incident where the person presented an ID card and somebody said, you are not the person? You're aware of only one time where that happened?
I'm aware of one time where I was more or less involved. I have reports of other instances in the quarantine of such an occurrence.
How many?
Well. I don't have an exact number, but
10,
in the quarantine
5,
instance,
3?
it was not one.
Yeah.
It was something being done with some frequency. And in fact, the report I have, when this was discovered and the official, the DRO would come in there to intervene. When the DRO left, the presiding officer literally said, I'm in charge here, don't worry, that DRO. But my contention in that regard has more to do with the fact that the recount, and I'm gung-ho on this, that the recount showed up a significant number of names crossed off of persons who immigration then certified or verified were not in the country. We have the situation where during the recount, the APNU, AFC, by whatever mechanism, challenged people and officially wrote to GCOM. Having written to GCOM, given the names of the people, the GCOM then sent those to the immigration people, who then responded in a 2-day span. And there was approximately a 75% verification based on the allegations made by the APNU AFC. I shared with Nohar the correspondence on that matter and a sample page of such a return, things during the week. So I am convinced.
Yeah.
The difficulty I have with that is that your starting point is that this is information that came from the PNC, that they saw this.
The accusation came from the PNC.
And therefore, the underlying information that they saw this name ticked off and this person was not there.
No, it's not them seeing the name ticked off.
Has not been verified.
Yeah.
It's not them seeing the name.
That's the problem I have.
Yeah.
It's not them seeing the name ticked off.
Yeah.
Those names were picked up as ticked off in the recount process. So they are not using their own documentation.
By whom?
By the PNC. But
Thank you. That's what I just said.
But they weren't singular in that process. They identified those people in the presence
Gentlemen,
of others.
Yeah.
This is GCOM's official document that they used to say, here is GCOM's document. Here it is showing these names are ticked off. And they didn't make the accusation then. What they had was a compilation of the names ticked off. And they made the accusation subsequent.
Yeah.
So they went and apparently did some field work to check if the people were around.
I'm glad you
then
said
they-
apparently. I'm glad you said apparently, Vincent,
Yeah.
because I was
Right?
there during the recount.
I don't know exactly what they did,
manufacture.
but they did make the allegation.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you know what?
It's called throwing mud in the
same kind
water
of
so you can't
concern
see the
you
bottom.
have, Timothy,
Yeah.
is the kind of concern I have from this perspective.
So in other words, going back to the system
fault
that we're
there would
talking
have to
about.
be that the immigration misreported.
Okay, let me ask you about the system, please, because we've gone into something else. The system that you're talking about is that Vincent Alexander turns up to vote, produces his ID card. The PPP and the PNC and the person in charge all look at their list and see Vincent Alexander with his picture. They all tick it off and you go and vote.
Right.
You then stick your finger in the ink so that you have permanent ink on your finger. You're aware of one occasion here in the last 3 elections and a few more in quarantine where there was an issue with the ID card, somebody saying you don't look like that person. But from the numbers you called there, we're looking at less than 10 for sure in 3 elections. So I think we can say that really isn't a big gap in the system.
I'm not relying on those numbers.
Yeah. Okay, gentlemen,
But
if we could move on a little, Tim, is that okay? Didn't want to spend so much time on GCOM. Is that okay, Tim? Or would you like, you want to finish up?
Of course. I don't want to belabor that.
Yeah. And just for all of our viewers' knowledge, an invitation did go out, correspondence was made with Mr. Clement Rohi, who declined and come in tonight's program. I then follow up to Mr. Says Ganraj to be in tonight's program. He has not responded. So we are continuously, we'll try to bring on a diverse conversation from all sides. An invitation will continue to go out. It would be good to have their version of some of these things, but mainly we want to be able to focus on the process going forward right now for Monday. And Paul Singh typed that if anyone is allowed to carry in their electronic device, being, I guess, the phones, and I think you ruled on that already. GCOM already ruled on that. No pictures in the voting booth.
People are not prevented from taking in their phones into the polling station. The intention is that they would, quote unquote, lodge those phones adjacent to the polling booth in the view of everyone. Here again, the human factor is critical in all of this. For Ballot Day, ran the stations from the prisons in Timeri all the way down to Ayangana. And though we had made a decision that the polling officials will be announcing this in the polling stations or the balloting stations, there was no ballot station where a GCOM official made the announcement. None. There was one balloting station at Camp Ayangana where a GDF rank, I think, I'm not sure, an officer, at the door of the auditorium, the sports auditorium, was retrieving the phones of the ranks who were going to. But in no other place did I see the GCOM personnel doing what we said they should do. And I had a difficulty with that prior because I attended a training session that was held for the press and a training session that was held for the party agents. At that training session, the people who were doing the training, the presentation, did not mention that aspect in the presentation. I then asked the DCO, the Deputy Chief Elections Officer, why is it these people did not mention that important aspect? And his response was, well, those trainers would not have known because they're not the trainers who would do the refreshing. So we have to ensure.
Yeah. So Mr. Alexander.
Do what they have to do.
Yeah, Mr. Alexander, being a veteran in all of this, I hope post-election there could be a much more wider discourse and certainly a much more better procedures in place so that, communication and accountability could become much more at a level where all Guyanese could have comfort in the voting process. Very quickly, Mr. Alexander, what's the voting list stands at right now, the amount of voters?
The amount of voters would be 7,000, you caught me there. It's 7,057, 690.
690, 757. So if I am to divide that by 65 seats, Devin, you have a spreadsheet there? By 65 seats,
It's about 7,000 plus per seat.
7,000 plus, close to 8,000 votes. And in our last election, divide that by 65, Devin?
Last election was 6,000 plus.
6,000 plus.
Yeah.
What's your expecting turnout, Mr. Alexander?
I wouldn't venture a comment on that.
Historic has been what, 72%?
For two reasons why I wouldn't venture a comment. We are talking about the turnout against the electoral roll. Given my disposition, it has to do with what I call substitute voting. Then the percentage given against the rule would be distorted. Given where I stand and my contention, evidentially, there were votes cast for persons who were not present. So the last elections, the official figures said something percent. For the other day, we have an average percent, I think of 83% turnout ballot. I think ballot day is quite different because the possibilities of other things are not as great on ballot day as they are on E-Day.
Okay, but still we're looking at the higher numbers in terms of per seat. So the pro rata will really be closer to 8,000 or probably slightly more depending on the turnout.
Yes.
So it's quite a challenging feat that is. So I really want to move on to our next topic for all of our viewers tonight. We want to spend probably the next 30 minutes talking about
Just let me say this one thing before you go on.
Sure, Mr. Alexander.
Because people can make deductions about possibilities in relation to parties, given that 8,000. There is the possibility that you can have two seats that can be had without 8,000 from the highest remainder arrangement, so that there is a possibility that the party that has highest remainder of 4,000 or highest remainder of 3,000 could in fact get a seat, although the normal seat requires around 8,000. Just thought I'd mention that.
No, I understand. I understand. I think that's where I guess we get into the top up and all of that. All right, so we spent a lot of time on GCOM, ladies and gentlemen. I hope Mr. Alexander brought some clarity, and of course, Mr. Jonas posed some very pertinent questions. We do have Mr. Paul Tennessee with us, and we'll probably have him comment on the first part of the next topic that we want to move on to. There is a poll that came out in Stabroek News today. Stabroek News, of course, is a very upstanding newspaper. Many people depend on Stabroek News for the contents and the validity of its contents. There's no way, of course, we need to caution our viewers that this poll was published. We picked up this poll, but one of the reasons why we brought it into the discussion, it kind of mirrors what we are hearing on the ground. We had several programs on Globespan. We do talk to others that are on the ground. And basically, within a 10 to 15% deviation, the poll does reflect what others are saying and what they're seeing on the ground, hence the reason why we brought this poll into the discussion today. But the main reason bringing into the poll is really the indication of what may be a possible minority government. If the possibility lies there for minority government, I really want to spend most of the program talking about the ramification, the effects and benefits, and even the cons that would be included in a minority government. Is not something that we have experienced too many times, of course, 2015 being one of them. So having said that, Devin, could you just bring in the that poll for a second?
Key findings. PPPC is projected to secure victory with 212,411 votes, 44%, positioning it to retain the presidency but not the majority in the National Assembly. APNU is expected to receive 164,878 votes, 34%, thereby maintaining its role as the main opposition and securing the spot as the leader of the opposition. Win, the newest entrant into Guyana's political sphere, is projected to achieve an impressive 99,724 votes, 21%, a remarkable outcome for a first-time party. AFC and smaller parties are collectively expected to secure 7,395 votes, just over 1%. If translated into seats, these results suggest a new National Assembly configured broadly along these lines. Respondents highlighted three pressing issues shaping their choices in 2025: persistent and high food inflation and the escalating cost of living, weaknesses within the police force and rising crime, endemic corruption within the public service, where too few benefit disproportionately from national resources.
Thank you, Devin. And just a note, a comment from Mr. J. Barrett. Some of these folks are taking this poll with a grain of salt. J. Barrett wrote, "The poll in Stabroek News has no validity." The writer wrote a praise letter for Win in Stabroek newsletter column today. So some have taken it with a grain of salt. As I mentioned, in talking to many folks on the ground, they basically mirror very closely what this poll indicates. Professor Paul Tennessee, you were also very keen in pointing out to me earlier this week how Stabroek News have done an extensive reporting on the cost of living. And why I bring that up is because one of the key factor that resulted in from that poll was cost of living, corruption, etc. So welcome, Professor Paul Tennessee, and you'd like to comment on the poll and also as it relates to the cost of living?
Well, first of all, I'd like to apologize to Tim, Vincent, Nohar, and Devin for arriving late. What happened was I had a very hectic day, but I had a very, very good news today because early this morning, my daughter called me and told me that my grandson, she dropped him off at school, his very first day at high school. And I was overexcited all day and had happy hour and forgot the my term. So I apologize to you guys. Tim, I really am disappointed you're not a presidential candidate because you're a man of great integrity and this discussion might have been different. Thank you, Nohar, for having me. Now, Nohar, the first thing I want to say about polls is that I remember Dr. Jagan used to say to me, there are polls and there are polls. All over the world, we have polls. I wouldn't put my head on the block for polls. But what I do know is that this election in Guyana is very different from any election that I have ever known since the election of 1985. And probably later, if you give me a chance, I will go back because I've documented every election from 1968 to 2020. And a lot of the complaints my dear friend Vincent is making now, he made them during 2020. Like he didn't like the idea of international observers. And also, I'm sorry you're not the leader of the PNC. You didn't get elected because you would have been a great presidential candidate too. But
Professor, can I just interrupt a second, please?
I don't have an opinion on these polls because today I was very busy. I didn't read those polls. I couldn't analyze it. But if you want my opinion of what I think, what are the factors that would influence who will win or lose the next election, or whether there will be a minority government, I'd be willing to express those views. Later down the line, probably these guys are on the ground and they could give a more informed opinion, but I'd love to share my views on it.
Yeah. And one quick question, Professor. You are talking to people on the ground in Guyana. I know that you have a line in. Does this poll reflect closely what the folks are saying to you in Guyana?
Well, I told you I didn't get to it. I just saw the poll. You just put it up, but I have not analyzed it. And you know, I'm an academic. I always have the arguments for and against, and I can't make those arguments without facts. I have text citations on arguments. So I see your poll, but I have a different view of the election. I think it's very different. I think this election could be surprise. I think there are two main parties contesting for the presidency of Guyana. One is the WIN and one is the PPPC. This is my view. And I think you could have a surprise, but I think the fundamental difference between WIM and the PPPC is that the PPP is a well-organized party that can deliver on election day a machinery that can monitor and take people to the polls and get them to vote. Now, WIN is a party that is very young, that has a lot of interesting characteristics. They have a network, but I am not sure if within 6 months they could have established a kind of organizational framework. But the leader is popular. The leader is popular for various reasons. He's very popular. We have never seen in recent times a phenomenon like that. People have spoken of a third force, but never one imagined in a matter of 6 months a party like WIN could have emerged.
Yeah. Thank you,
So
Professor.
I believe it's a very complex discussion. It's very difficult to anticipate a result, but I believe it could, it's possible. People are saying minority government.
Yeah.
That's possible. We've had it before. It will happen again. It depends on, how many seats they will get and not get. So let me give Tim and the others a chance to
Yeah.
view.
Thank you,
I'd
Professor.
like to come back and give my opinion on it in a more concrete.
Sure. And Mr. Alexander, any comments on what you're seeing on the grounds in Guyana as relate to the poll?
I would prefer, as a commissioner, not to be out there predicting winner or loser. I prefer not to. But I would want to make one observation about the voting population and the extent of the list. I think that we have a large number of people on the list this time who were previously eligible but not on the list. I'm saying this from this perspective, that when the cash grant was announced, GCOM observed a surge in registration. This was not a surge of 14-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It's a surge of people who previously should have been registered. So that there is evidence that a large number of people, because of the cash grant, were registered. Now, there is a possibility, therefore, of a certain number of people who previously may not have voted, who may now cast their vote. And the chances are, for the reasons why they weren't previously registered, and for the reasons why they are presently registered, that many of those people may well be people who are supporting WIN.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Alexander. Tim, if I remember my numbers correctly, I don't have that file in front of me. What Mr. Alexander is referring to, at least additional registrants, I think it's circled around 150 something thousand additional names from the previous list that they had. I may be off a little because I don't have my records in front of me. But what's your comments on this, Tim? There's a poll, there's people on the ground, there's social media, and there's just new lists that is really additional people that came on this list. What would you make out of all of this?
I got to defer to what Vincent is saying there. If he saw this increase happening around the time of the cash grants, cause and effect, that's very logical. And I don't have any information to second guess that or go behind it. It makes sense to me. I am satisfied in my own mind that on election day, when you turn up with your ID and vote and everybody takes your name off the list, and you put your finger in the ink so you can't vote again, whether you are the person represented in the ID you present or not. You can only vote that one time because your finger's in the ink. After they reconcile the numbers in the place of poll at the end of the day, you have a fair system. And once those votes are counted, all is well. So I don't think that it's really very important as to the numbers on the list. Who those people are, I hear Vincent's speculation that they may be Win supporters, and I respect his decision to decline to speculate further. I agree with that. I think that given his position, that is the right thing to do. But for me, no, I'm sorry, I can't help. I don't know which way they will jump, but I am sure that in 2011, when PPP lost by the majority by that one seat, although they kept the government, and in 2015, when they had exactly the same proportion in parliament, after the poor governance by the PNC, the 2020 elections only saw a shift of one seat. They got the majority by one seat. So I'm really looking forward to see what impact Win has. Because if there is disillusionment because of increasing corruption, all bets are off. I think anything can happen on Monday.
Yeah. Professor, we're going to play another video, and this is something that you point out. And of course, this is the key issue in talking to many of the people on the ground, cost of living. Devin, could you just go to that for a second? And again, we really wish some of these other invitees.
Stabroek News spoke to members of the public in Liverpool, Quarantine, Region 6 on Wednesday about the rising cost of living and how it is affecting them. The following are their comments. Claudette Brown, a pensioner, said, "The cost of living is affecting me, but still, I can't take it on. I'm a pensioner and I'm not working anywhere, then I have to wait until month end for money. Not to say I'm living with somebody. I just gotta get things going on my end. I just relying on my pension, and then the prices for items high in the supermarket. I don't have a special place where I go and do my shopping. I buy greens from Port Morant Market if I wake up early, and sometimes I go to the supermarket right in Lancaster and buy my groceries. The cost for sugar gone up at the supermarket. Couple months ago, a pound of sugar cost $260. A pound of sugar costs $360 now. Also, before, a small bag basmati rice cost $3,000. Now I'm paying $3,400 for the small bag. I feel if we can come together and unite as one to bring down prices, that will be nice." Article from Stabroek News.
And Devin, while Professor is spooning up to make his comments, could you bring up that spreadsheet for me? Gentlemen, we sort of extrapolate this from the manifesto, APNU, WIN, and PPP, and basically we put together what would be what they're promising in their manifesto. APNU promised 35% increase, WIN promising scale up to 50%, but not specific in the amount. So we assume a 35% increase as well. And when we scroll down to PPP, they're saying that no specific amount, but based on negotiation. So estimate based on historic is usually about 12% from what we've seen in the past. Devin, go right back up on that spreadsheet. I'm going through these figures very quickly, Professor, but it relates to cost of living. So I took an average salary of 175,000. Increase of 35% to 61, and there's no taxation because APNU is proposing a threshold of 400,000 before your taxes are taken out. So if someone would literally go home net 236,000 from an APNU manifesto. From a WIN manifesto reduces PYE from 35 to 25%. We factor that in, $227,000. And go down a little further, Devin, to the PPP. PPP, of course, didn't give a specific, so we used a historic of 12%. They came out with a gross of 196,000. But then the PPP threshold is at 130,000. So the difference between 130 and 196, we factor in the 35% taxation, which takes out 23,000. So they net $172,000. So 172,000 net based on 175% with a 12% increase. And then, of course, we go back up, Devon, 227 for Win and 236 for Apnu. Professor, with cost of living and these type of salaries, what's your opinion, and what could be done to help the Guyanese, no matter who wins the next election?
Well, I want to make a few comments on that. Number one is since I'm 21 years old in the labor movement. So I'm very concerned about the poor and the powerless and the marginalized. But I want to say this, that manifestos remind me of a great leader in China who said, they paint a cake and they tell the people to eat it. Now, manifestos are like that. And the visions without implementation is hallucination. And since political independence, we have been living from one hallucination to another. Now, Mirza Sahadat, who's an attorney at law in Crabwood Creek, Skeldon, since he was a student in 82, he had supported me when I went back to Guyana. And he sent me this note in April that the cost of living is so high. It is a miracle that poor people are surviving here. I'm not speaking about lazy people. Government cannot prioritize investment and infrastructural development over people. Now that we have a great regular source of income through oil, our approach should be to strike a balance between investment, infrastructural development, and social welfare. And if government has to choose, people should come first. I agree with Mirza on that point. And then Anil Nanlal, who's the Attorney General, said about this election that we will be breaking the back of racial voting. So that's another characteristics of this election. I know Liverpool very well. It's a predominantly Afro-Guyanese village, apart from being in the quarantine and living over Guyana. But someone also tell me, imagine living in a country, the fastest growing economy in the world, surrounded by multi-billion dollars infrastructural wealth, and yet I'm in poverty. I have the role of a spectator. That's a good friend of mine just told me. And he reminded me of Bob Marley. In abundance of water, the fool is thirsty. So are the 40% people of Guyana thirsty?
Yeah.
Now, so the question of poverty is a reality. The question is, how will it be effectively addressed by these political parties, but particularly the two parties that seem to have an opportunity to win the elections? One is a surprise, the win. Everybody will be surprised because they're about 6 months old, but we've been seeing a lot of people turning out. Now, Basdev Pandey, who's a good friend of both you and I, and he passed, he always used to remind me, say, Paul, you can have all the crowds in the world, but the election is determined on the day of election. You got to get people out there to go and vote. You have to have the machinery. You have to verify the election. Now, I have one candidate in this election. It's called Verifiable, Free, and Fair Election. That's the name of my candidate. Whichever candidate wins, but the election is free and fair, I respect that government. I support that government. I even will offer my services to my government. I've not been very successful with that, with the PNC and PPP. But I repeat this. So the question is, I'm a man of independent thought and action. My legacy has been contributing to verifiable, free, and fair election. So that is what I would like to see. But I would like to see the problem of poverty being addressed effectively. And I know that's a concern of yours, Noah. And it is true that there is poverty in Guyana, and nobody could deny that. The ruling party are in power. But we have had a history since political independence of both the PNC, the PPP, the APNU, the AFC being in power. And we are in the same boat.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Mr. Alexander, before I go to you, in the interest of time, I just want to kind of combine this next video into both yourself and Timothy Jonas' comment. So Devin, could you go to that video on the President Ali's statements last night, I believe, on the East Bank?
Ali hints at another cash grant before year-end. President Irfan Ali Tuesday night signaled that Guyanese could receive another cash grant payout before year-end. I heard PM Prime Minister told them next year is the next grant. If you behave yourself, you get it this year, he told a People's Progressive Party Civic PPPE election campaign community meeting at Eccles, East Bank Demerara, just days before Guyanese go to the polls on September 1 to elect a new government of their choice. Dr. Ali said it was likely that Guyanese could cash in a grant before year-end. Article taken from Demerara Waves.
Same question to both you, Mr. Alexander, and to Mr. Timothy Jonas. We have a serious issue with poverty. And certainly there seems to be a major disparity in terms of human development that is for the people versus the infrastructure that's being spent. And then you have these sort of statements on the political platforms. While people does welcome the grants, etc., and Mr. Virginia Bisesa last night on Globespan also pointed out qualitative versus quantitative. I mean, how do we get these political parties, all of them, that is, as Paul Tennessee mentioned, to really truly use this opportunity that we're getting from oil and gas to address our poverty level? Mr. Alexander?
On the question of poverty, juxtaposed to the elections and how people are likely to vote, I would have liked, for example, if I were looking at polls, to do a disaggregation of the population along these lines. Workers, those are the regular workers. Professionals, some people I want to call, forgive me for using the term, hustlers, senior citizens, and businessmen, business persons. I do that disaggregation of our society because I don't think that we have a homogeneous disposition to this question of poverty. And that whilst it is said that 50% are affected by poverty, there's different outlook across these categories in that regard. And the response to manifestos largely has to do with that disaggregation, I think. That there are those, for example, the people who, forgivingly, I call hustlers, are the ones who are going to look to see what the cash grants are. Of course, people like the pensioners and so they're going to look to see what the material difference will be for them. But there are others who have a different kind of interest. And in that regard, I am disappointed that my country seems not to be focused on human development as the core issue that needs to be addressed to take this country forward. Indeed, parties have mentioned aspects of human development. I have not really seen a party saying, look, this is what development ought to mean for the average Guyanese. And then to look at the indicators of development, which are issues like literacy rate, mortality rate, birth rate, leisure. Of course, the issue of salaries will come in there as well. But the whole question of the development of a Guyanese person could enjoy a certain quality of life, both from a material perspective and from a spiritual and moralistic perspective. That seems to be missing. You know, we don't see. We hear stats, for example, about how many children pass CXC this year as opposed to last year. We don't hear stats about how many dropouts there are in the school system. And therefore, there's, one really cannot say that this represents any improvement. So I think that we have to, the question of human development has to be addressed. And it's not just a question of material development, it's a question of the human personality and the enhancement and quality of human life. And I'm disappointed with where we are in that regard.
Yeah, yeah. Tim, go right ahead, please.
No, Hart, just to be clear, your question is alleviation of poverty?
No, my question is that how can we get these political parties to focus more in that area? I went through the salary level proposed in the manifesto. Tim, how is it that the people are not private sector, but how the civic society can get the government to focus more on human development, or people that is, versus all this infrastructure money that they're spending? How could we do that? I mean, it's a tough question in the sense that how could we influence them? And I think it takes us back to the voting booth.
I think that the erroneous premise of that question is that it assumes that there is an appetite that the people in power want to change the status quo in terms of the voter base. We've seen in Guyana that despite poor governance over 50 years, and especially sparked by gas and oil more recently, as Guyanese become more affluent, they become better educated, their perceptions are broader, they see abroad and they see how things work in foreign countries. And they're less inclined to vote race, so that the voter base of each of the two parties is under threat. I think that's why we're seeing this enormous shift this election, where there seems to be a breakaway. We're talking degrees gradually, but there seems to be an increasing breakaway from the traditional race-based voting. And I believe that is because Guyanese are becoming more educated and aware of worldwide events and realizing how narrow we have always been here. That hurts both the PPP and the PNC, because suddenly they have to show that they're doing a good job. They can't rely on the fact that their voters look like them. So I'm not sure that there's an appetite to really help and change that status quo. But I can tell you from my point of view, I am satisfied and have been satisfied from the first cash handout that happened, that it's political gimmickry. You see, when I give you a cash handout, I look like your savior. I look like a deity coming to hand you an envelope, and you say, "Thank you, master," because I'm giving you something for free. And you say, "Long live the master that's giving me something for free." It's a gimmick, and it needs to stop, because it needs to be done as a system. It cannot be done at the arbitrary whim of some government official who says, "If y'all behave good, we might give y'all another one before the end of the year." It needs to be done as part of a system within the NIS. So a single mother knows that for her child, she will get so much money a month. An unemployed person knows he will get so much money a month. The other problem with the cash handout is that someone as wealthy as Nohar or Vincent gets the same 100,000 as the poor widow with 6 children. That's nonsensical. Anybody with the slightest modicum of common sense who wants to move away from the gimmick will recognize that if you take 50% of those people who don't need the cash handout, including Nohar and Vincent, you immediately double the amount of money you can pay to the remaining 50% who do need it. But that's not important, because we like to be a deity, like Massa, handing you gifts, like the kings of old who used to throw coins to the people in the villages they walked past. We like that. But there needs to be a system where you register at NIS. If you're unemployed, you get a benefit. When you get a job, you start contributing to NIS. We have foreigners that represent now 10, maybe even 15% of the people living in Guyana. They need to be paying taxes, contributing to NIS, so that NIS needs to be an institution that is collecting money from the people who are earning, and as a system, as of right, giving allowances to the people at the bottom who don't have. That is how the system should work. Every time you hear cash handout, We are going back to the old days where some royalty deigns to give us a little freck, throw it down in the road so that everybody can grovel for it. That's not how to run a country.
Noah, can I make a quick comment? I know you're running out of time, unfortunately. Can I? Noah?
Yes, go ahead, Professor.
I concur with about 90% of what Tim just said, but I want to suggest that the answer is decentralization. We have to have the poor, the powerless, and the marginalized to be enthroned at the tables of governance across Guyana. Now we have to start with local government. You are not going to solve the economic problems from the top. It has to initiate at the bottom. But people have to have significant budgets, and local government has to be independent or autonomous, at least, of political parties. They have to have significant budgets, and they have to have political democratic decision-making powers to conceive and implement such policies. It's not going to happen from the top. I know of no country in the history of the world where transformation has come from the top.
And
So
Professor,
that is what has to happen. It has not happened, but that is what we have to campaign for and advocate for.
Right. But Mr. Timothy Jonas was very correct when he said that the government of the day needs to have the appetite to want to make the changes for these people's lives. So in the last 15, 20 minutes, we talked about cost of living and the effects on the on what we deem to be people living in a poverty line, close to about 47, 49%. And Sam wrote, "This guy know her is anti-PPP." So I think, Sam, if you're saying us addressing the issue of poverty is being anti-PPP, I believe, Paul, your alliance and my alliance does not meet really and truly. I am looking towards the benefits of the people. One other, I think it was Adam, wrote something about 900,000 barrels per day, and yet we are having this type of discussion on poverty. So Sam, addressing the people needs, it's not being anti-PPP. And I really want to say to all of my brothers and sisters who support the PPP or who support PNC or APNU, I truly want to say to you that if you do have a political party that's your favorite, and you want that party to win year in, election over election, then the onus is on you to be able to question and to be able to have discourses within your political party and in the public space so we all could be able to benefit from a better representation. I truly cannot get to understand why is it that if it is that we have questions or if it is that we have different opinions, we are anti. No, we are not. We are pro-Guyana. We are pro for the people. And I have mentioned on Globespan day in and day out that count the cost of our choices. When we choose political parties and race over our country, we have seen the result where we are at, and we certainly need to create a new pathway forward. I want to move over now quickly. We have less than half an hour on minority governments. And I want to say to all of our viewers and to our panelists, Mr. Alexander, Mr. Jonas, and Mr. Paul Tennessee, one of the key factor that most people would say or comments that comes out of the Guyanese discourse in a minority government that there will be stalemate. But I want to point out that there are countries that are basically currently minority governments or they have really frequently had minority governments. And those countries are Australia, Canada, France, India, Ireland, Italy, Norway, Portland, Portugal, Romania, Spain, Sweden, United Kingdom. These are all countries that either have or frequently have minority governments, Norway being one of the top. Sweden, look at their economy, and they were able to strive under minority governments. So for us to say there's going to be stalemates, I am not sure that's 100% correct. But Professor, what would be your comments on that? I mean, if it is that come next week, we are dealing with a minority government, do you see the representation of most of the people interests being catered to, or do you see stalemate type of situation?
Well, it depends on the quality of the people who are elected into the parliament. If they are going to practice party politics and sectarian politics, then they may have the attitude that the role of the parliament is to oppose, expose, oppose, and depose. And if that is their attitude, then definitely you're going to have a government that is unstable. Now, instability, political instability is the worst thing could happen to Guyana. So they will have to call another elections, and we go back to another elections. I have not seen the politicians of Guyana as yet demonstrate any high level of patriotism and democratic culture until now in the history of political history of Guyana. So it would be very interesting to see if there will be a change of the nature of these politicians. Because one of the things is when you get into power, you get corrupt. When you are in the opposition, you expose, you oppose, and you depose. So I've never heard of Guyana having a political culture with that kind of maturity. I think what would happen is that a minority government can create instability. But I know that Tim in the past has mentioned that if you do have a minority government, that it could respond to more accountability and more transparency and perhaps negotiations. But that will require a new political culture. And who will give leadership in establishing that new political culture? Will whoever is elected president do that, take the initiatives, or will it come from the parliament?
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
problem. Right,
Yeah,
Tim?
and Mr. Alexander, given the fact that you mentioned of this increased voters list, of most of them are being in the youths, is there an opportunity here within a minority government where a broader scale of the people are represented, be it the private sector are represented properly, the lower income people are represented properly, all sectors basically? Could we get to that? I understand what Professor Paul Tennessee is saying, that they may be, we may not have the political maturity, but we do now have, as Timothy Jonas just pointed out, we do have a maturity among our voting blocks. They're moving away from race and they're looking at issues, etc. So is there an opportunity here? Because we regurgitating the same problem over and over and not looking for a light at the end of the tunnel. And that's what I am looking for.
I would respond to that question this way. We had a minority government in 2011, and we saw what happened. We had a minority government in 2015, and no, we had a majority government. Sorry. Yes, a minority government. We had a minority government twice, and we saw what happened with the minority government. And I am equating 2015, 2020 incident to some kind of a minority arrangement. What emerged? Minority in parliament when it came to the determination of the matter. But in 2011, there was a minority, and in 2011 there was a minority. Now, what I want to make is this: that I feel that what happens in 2025, if there's a minority government, has a lot to do with the disposition of the third party. I don't think that the political culture of the APNU or of the PPPC will make any difference in that scenario. It's the third party that will have to make the difference. And in that regard, the possible third force is win. The other element is that if there's a minority government, it depends on the coming together of the majority. They're coming together, because you can have a minority government but a very fractured majority, and therefore the minority may still be able to have its way, and in a very unstable situation. So for me, the question is, one, how does that majority operate? Are they united or are they fractured? Two, that you would not easily see APNU or the PPP behaving any different. And so those who will have to make the difference, if there's going to be a difference, will be the other parties.
Yeah. Yeah. Hey, Tim, before you jump in, Jay Barrett gave Globespan a very nice plug here. And I really want to read it because it certainly is it's a nice comment that gives encouragement as we're trying to stand in the middle somehow. But you can't be in the middle without, calling wrong and right. Globespan is an equal opportunity program, Jay Barrett wrote. PPP, top people used to appear on Globespan, and I think Timothy Jonas and Mr. Alexander will remember that very clearly in 2020. You had all the top PPP and Nandalal, etc., were on Globespan. They don't respond to invitation to be on the panel. That's their error. Mr. Nohar is a fair man. Nice plug, Jay Barrett. I really appreciate that. We are trying to stay somehow one of the few platform that tries to bring on all different voices. Tim, in your response on this minority government, uh, it was pointed out to me as well that in a minority government, when budgets are being passed, would it be allowed, like when you come back 3 months later and ask for $55 billion supplemental budgets? And in your comments, could you cover things like the committees, how those constituted, and of course, things like the big projects, the mega projects in the country, Tim. Does a minority government, let's say, whichever party is in the minority side, but there is no winner takes all, would they be able to request things like, well, we love this project, the country needs this project, but we need to see feasibility studies. We need to be on the committee. We need to have more than one feasibility study. Would things like this starts to happen, or will there be some sort of immaturity and the brittling of the economy going forward and things like that? That's a lot I'm saying, but I'm trying to get it in because we're short of time.
I was surprised and heartened to hear Vincent say that neither the PPP nor the PNC will change its stripes.
Very interesting.
Sorry to interrupt you,
I
Tim. I
love
picked
that.
up on that.
Vincent, congrats.
I truly picked up on that, but I didn't want to smile. Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up.
Vincent better be careful that he don't get eaten up tomorrow morning.
And I was equally impressed by his recognition, which I agree with, that the effectiveness of a majority opposition in Parliament will turn on the competence of the third party. So there are a number of obstacles the third party has. I agree with your example, Vincent, that it was wasted in 2011. And the reason it was wasted is because those woebegone folk in the AFC did not understand who they were representing, namely people like me. And their only hope was to hold it out, be obstructive, and to get into government the next go round. Whereas they really had a lot of potential, given their control of Parliament, to make meaningful changes that would help the country and would help them because people would see the result. So here's the downside of the opposition majority that I have always advocated for. Under our Burnham Constitution, you pass a law in Parliament, and that law has to go to the president and does not become law until the president assents. And if the president refuses to assent and sends it back, it cannot go back to the president again unless it has 2/3 majority in Parliament. So Burnham nailed it down tight. The fact is, in Parliament, you can't pass a law unless the president assents. Good. But you can refuse to pass any other law until the president assents to the law you want. So the president wants a budget so that he can implement his road building and his cash handouts. And you can say no. And you can say to the government, when you approve my act, which puts 3 opposition members on the Public Procurement Commission so they can see how you're spending the money, then I will approve your budget. When you approve my act, which removes state control of all media and mandates the sale of the Chronicle and NCM, then I will pass your budget. And when you approve my act, which mandates that any government-owned company like Gaiwa and GPL and the GRDB must be represented by a board appointed half by the opposition and half by you, so that there is transparency on those boards, then I will pass your budget. Now, all of those changes, let me go with some more. When you approve my act to reform the NIS, so that the people who need the cash that we now have so much of are receiving it in a systemic and orderly manner and not as a cash handout, then I will pass your budget. If each of those proposals, when you approve my act, putting opposition members on Central Housing and Planning Board so that when they're handing out house lots, it's not being done by bribing ministers and people internally, but it's being done by a system that has the approval of both PNC and PPP and the third party, or I will not pass your budget. If each of those proposed pieces of legislation is informed to the public and explained to the public, then every time the president refuses to assent and says, no, only my people must be on central housing, only my people must be on GPL, the public will begin to understand. And the next elections, when you don't approve his budget, he may find himself out of government altogether. So I agree with Vincent. It has got to be done carefully, openly, transparently, and boldly by the third party, with the knowledge that if the government of the day is obdurate, you will go back to election soon, but you will go back stronger. Because we know the government of the day won by 1 seat. It will not take a lot if the people are saying, but these are good measures. Why do you have a problem with allowing both sides to be present in seeing how you're dealing with the oil money and in your natural resources fund and how you're allocating it and how much money you borrow in to build these roads and who you're awarding the contracts to? Why can't everybody see how this is happening? If the third party shows that to the public, that this is what the laws are about, this is how we're trying to pass the laws, that 1 seat majority, that 1 seat or half a seat that the government, the minority government has, they might lose even that. So it empowers the third party. It gives them more force. It shows the public that you are doing something good, and it puts the government in a difficult position to reject laws that are obviously fair and designed to create what is truly a one Guyana in our fractured society. That's the way to do it. It's not easy, but there's no other solution.
After Tim finish?
Sure,
can I make
Professor,
a very
right after Tim. Just give me 2
two
minutes,
things.
Professor.
Yeah, I'm
Professor,
extremely
you'll get 2 minutes. You'll get 2
Okay, I'm
minutes.
actually sympathetic to what Tim and Vincent said,
Yes, yes.
except I have a third option. Now, the thing is, we are not looking at the rise and fall of oil prices in the global market. I did a paper on the history of oil in Guyana. That is a situation of uncertainty and can determine what happens even after that. Number two, if I had a third option and I were elected president with a minority government, what I will do is to call elections within 3 to 6 months after I look at the results of the election and I negotiate a patriotic alliance for the next election I will go to with the parties that have done very well in the election and negotiate a platform for the next election. But I don't like minority government because it's instability.
Forgive me, Professor, forgive me, but I really want to, in Timothy Jonas, outline a ray of hope for the people there. Because what he's saying is that accountability in the public vis-a-vis the type of laws, the type of budgets, the type of committees, if done and put in the public domain, the people themselves can determine what is right and what is wrong. So I think there's in absent of a constitutional reform, which we don't have yet, and it's a really high fruit for us to pick off the tree. I think what Timothy Jonas just explained may be a ray of light for us. Not maybe, I really think it is, considering the situation that we're in. Look, brothers and sisters, to all of my fellow Guyanese, I know we had 2 incidents with Facebook service tonight. but I see that we had a substantial amount of people on the YouTube channel. I really want to say to you that nothing wrong with the United States of America and all its different. We must be very grateful to the United States of America. They've opened the doors to us and they've given us a way to survive over these years. And if you look at the agencies, then what they're saying about us Guyanese, if you look at OFAC, what's coming out of OFAC, if you look at the State Department releases about Guyana, its corruptions and drug smuggling, etc., United Nations talks about human rights. The Carter Center report, each one of you should really get your hands on that report and read it. And then you would determine for yourself the state that we are in as a country and how important it is for us to be able to have a functional democracy within our parliament. Let's move the fight from off the street among the races, and let's move that fight within the parliament. Let every minority political party juggle towards the interests of the people they represent and the party that's in government. And on that note, I do have a stalwart for tomorrow night, a man that the country respect, a man that who's proven himself in serving the country, and that's no other than Mr. Ralph Ramkaran. I will have him on tomorrow night at 7:30. I want to talk about morality. I want to talk about transparency and accountability if that's part of our voting come September 1. I am also hoping that I could get Dr. Carl Greenidge on with him, but if I don't, it will be Mr. Ralph Ramkaran, because I believe these three things need to be part of our voting slip when we vote September 1. Morality should be included, and that incorporates also our religious belief, transparency, and accountability, so Guyanese could start enjoying what they were born with. They were born with billions of dollars of gold, oil, agriculture in so many different ways, but we have not been able to realize that because of our politics. So I want to go to Professor Paul Tennessee for closing statement, and then to Mr. Alexander and to Timothy Jonas. But I want to say to Timothy Jonas tonight, I think Devon will cut a piece from what Timothy spoke about, the functionality of a minority government, and circulate that, because I think that it is a ray of light for us Guyanese to come out of where we have been in this yoke of bondage that's been there for us for 60 years. Professor, yes, please go ahead with your closing comments.
No, I'll just like to say that I wish Guyanese that everybody who is eligible to vote will go out and vote. I hope there'll be a peaceful election and a free and fair and verifiable election. And whoever is elected, I expect everybody to respect it. And I look forward to receiving the reports of both the national and international observer, and that the election would be verified as free and fair. That is my hope for Guyanese and Guyana. It's a pillar for democracy. Thank you.
Mr. Alexander, before your closing comment, you've really faced some terrible comments in Globespan 24/7, and really want to thank you again for withstanding that type of punishment, if I would use those words. But after September 1st, post-election, I truly hope, Mr. Alexander, and this is coming from my heart for the people of Guyana, that you would play a much more active role and much more vocal role, particularly with the younger generation, so that you could educate them towards the changes that we need to have in GCOM. I have to tell you, it's very difficult sometimes to sit and listen to things such as, you execute a decision based on no cell phones, but that's not channeled downwards. Towards those type of things. I don't want you to spend time on that part of the closing remarks. I just want to ask you from a personal level, on behalf of all love-fearing, God-fearing Guyanese people, post September 1, please, we want to hear from you. We want you to engage the young people. We have to take recommendation to change the whole constitution of GCOM and how it operates. Please, your closing comment, Mr. Alexander, and thank you again.
May I say, as I continue my retirement process, that the area in which I feel very comfortable contributing in the area of public education. I go to these elections with a bated breath, given my own disposition that whilst we have a number of mechanical things that will take us to elections, that we have not done enough pre-election to guarantee an environment of free, fair, and transparent elections. May I say, however, that I join with both Paul and Timothy in what they said in relation to poverty. I am an advocate of decentralization. I think it's essential, particularly in the context of the Guyanese plural society. I agree with Timothy on the question of the kind of things we need to do to deal with poverty. I may have some programmatic differences. So, for example, if I were to give them a chance, I wouldn't accentuate a cash grant to school children. I will accentuate the fact that they get transportation, that they get meals, and other facilities to ensure that, in fact, the money meets the school children, so that that indicator of development I mentioned could be attained. That is the level of literacy in a context where even the content of education ought to be changed to produce people who are prepared to face the national challenges rather than the individual challenges.
Thank you. And you'll be happy to hear, Mr. Alexander, someone just called you a dinosaur on the program. Imran, I'm just giving you an example of the level of mentality, but Mr. Imran, I really
But
welcome you on
Vincent, that would
Globespan.
be a good title for a book that you will write.
Or
I'm a
I have seen
dinosaur.
worst. I've seen them post worst about Mr. Vincent Alexander. But I want to say to Mr. Imran that you have a family or you have a body, and if part of your body is sick, do you cut it off and throw it away, or do you try to nurse it? So if it is you disagree with Mr. Alexander, fine. And that's what this program is about. We agree to disagree so that we could come up with a consensus that would help us to move our country forward. You know, we looked at Monday night at Globespan, and Mr. Imran, if you go back to Monday night and Globespan, it's all about the past, nothing about us talking about moving forward with the future. So again, Mr. Alexander, I truly appreciate your, what we would call in plain language, thick skin. Hey, Tim, your last set of comments were very, very encouraging. Certainly, it's a ray of light, and really, truly leave us with some hope here, Tim. How can the Guyanese people benefit from this new economy that we have, oil and gas, that is?
Well, I always admire your eternal optimism, Noah. I don't know if you'll point to the third party that is in this context, in this environment, going to be able to achieve that. It's one of the reasons that I'm holding my breath. I'm hoping for the best, but I'm not expecting the best. I want to echo what you said about Vincent. It's one thing to come on this program and speak up and propound a position and defend a position. It's another thing to sit in the back of the room, as your viewers do, and hurl comments under the guise of anonymity, often false, fake profiles. In my experience, those people that like to throw those comments would not be able to withstand the rigors of an honest discussion on any of the subjects that you're touching on. And for me, Noah, what you've done over the last 5 years has been very important to try to find a middle ground, to highlight what is right, highlight what is wrong. And the fact of the matter is that when a referee is blowing the football game and both teams are cheating, each team is going to be aggrieved by each blow, because as fair as the referee is, half of the people on the field are going to be vexed. And that's what we see in Ghana. Both teams have been cheating, and their supporters don't give a damn. But you've been doing well, and I want to extend my compliments to you, Noah. You've really tried your best over the last years.
Okay, well then, thank you very much. And we're certainly going to extrapolate the part of what you mentioned on the minority government. Again, viewers, please join me tomorrow night. It's not only about the voting, it's what we are voting for. Morality. We need to have morality in our society. We need to have transparency and accountability. And with today's social media and the younger generation coming up in Guyana, there is an avenue or a window of opportunity for us to have a long-lasting change that would not only benefit the Guyanese in Guyana, but to the larger extent, all of those in the diaspora. So once again, I want to thank Mr. Timothy Jonas, Mr. Vincent Alexander, and Professor Paul Tennessee, and I thank each one of you for being a part of Globespan 24/7. And I'll see you guys tomorrow night, 7:30, with Mr. Ralph Ramkaran. Have a good night, everyone.